MSW Media.
Hi, I'm Harry Littman, host of Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent figures from government law and journalism for a dynamic discussion of the most important topics of the day. Each Monday, I'm joined by a slate of Feds favorites and new voices to break down the headlines and give the insider's view of what's going on in Washington and beyond. Plus sidebars explaining important legal concepts read by your favorite celebrities. Find Talking Feds wherever you get your podcasts.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So yeah, now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. This is episode 102 of Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, January 4th. I'm your host, Allison Gill. With me, as always, real-life lawyer and real-life friend, Andrew Torrez. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Allison. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, my friend. It's going to be the year of accountability, I've decided.
I like that. That's our, word for the year.
Yeah. Investigations was 2022.
Yeah, accountability.
And,
that's, I think you're right.
Yeah, accountability. And, we have a great show about accountability because there are now multiple investigations, criminal and civil, open against an elected congressman from New York by the name of George Santos. I know everybody's heard his name. We've talked about it a little bit on the beans, but we haven't gotten into the legal weeds. We've just talked about his absolute bald-faced lies. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the actual crimes that could be charged and what can't be charged as crimes and why it's a good thing those aren't crimes in our country. But first, I think we should open up with our new patrons.
Yeah, and this list is going to go back a couple weeks since we, took off for the holidays. But everybody that gave us as little as $1 over at patreon.com/Aisle 45 pod. That's AISLE 45 POD. You get a shout out. And,
yeah, absolutely. You get a shout out. And by the way, I want to thank everybody for giving us a week off there. That was really meaningful.
That was nice. I got to see my parents in Florida and,
nice.
do a little bit of traveling. And it was good.
I got to watch the West Wing Marathon on HLN. And learn about what the battery daddy is. We can go into that later if you want, but we don't have to do that. I'm just not used to commercials. But apparently it's this caddy that you can store your batteries in, and they felt the need to make it sound dirty by calling it the battery daddy. I'll never understand that, but I digress. Let's talk about our new patrons. We have Ann Kaufman, placeholder for a clever Patreon name. Love it. That is a clever Patreon name, by the way. Jinx Graymoon, do not take advice about taking legal advice from a podcast. Ernest Lansdale, Gina Marie Opalescent, or Opalescent, if you will. Morgan Wollum, Kate Moran, John Skiffington, Elizabeth, Monica Meyer, Danny Parker, Heather Solonga, diplomatic iocane immunity. It is odorless and tasteless. Judith Parsons, Luann Rasmussen, and Zach Lovett.
I am also not left-handed. Thank you to Ann Zachritz, Ben Foe, Terrence Broadwell, Colin Reimer, Josh Andrews, Eddie, Esma, and Russo are law dogs. Oh, well, welcome aboard. Kathleen Hammett, Meg Alexander, Amanda Iaraway, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Peter Gavin, Susan Ingram, Annie DeGroot, Meredith Blake J, Willow Ray, and King of Aces. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. We really, really appreciate it. And more importantly, couldn't do it without you. So thank you. And we're committed to bringing you some great stuff in 2023, the year of accountability. Love it.
Yes, true cleanup happening this year, I promise. Now, Andrew, let's talk about our friend George, because I tweeted on New Year's Eve, because a lot of folks, wanted to throw him in jail for lying to the public. But my tweet says, no, you can't go to jail for lying to the public. You can go to jail for lying to donors to raise money on false pretenses. You can go to jail for lying to Congress or other investigators. And you can go to jail for taking illegal campaign contributions. I didn't really name any names, but I don't think I had to in this particular tweet.
Yeah, and I don't think you need a lawyer co-host. I mean, that is an absolutely accurate summary, and it's an accurate summary at every level of resolution, right? Like, so one of the things that you learn, it's true in our criminal system. This is even true in our civil system, right? Like, one of the very first things you learn in torts class as a lawyer is the difference between an enforceable promise under contract and an unenforceable promise, right? And you read, can't remember the name of the case, but you read a case involving a lawyer who promises his associate, hey, I will always take care of you, right? And then when it comes time for the lawyer to retire, he's a scumbag. He sells the firm. He does wrong by the associate. And the associate sues and says, I've been working for you for a decade. You promised you would always take care of me. And he was like, oh, right. I lied. That's how that happened. And the court said, look, a one-sided promise into the ether without consideration, without more, not enforceable. I promise I'll always take care of you, even if somebody relies on that, even if somebody engages in behavior over a long period of time. Probably not a thing you can sue for. Now, I know our lawyers in the audience are going to sit there and they're going to come back with promissory estoppel and detrimental wrong. Yes, there are. Okay, this is a broad premise. Okay, but that broad premise is we don't make you liable for lies in the ether. We don't make you criminally liable for lying to people in the ether. But what we do is punish certain kinds of lying.
Right. And I wanted to kick this off with, just to clear it out as a possibility first, is defamation. Because you can be civilly sued for defamation for a lie that you tell about somebody else, but I don't think you can be in trouble for defaming yourself.
I don't know who would have standing in that case.
Unless you're maybe a sovereign citizen and you're suing your real
straw
person.
Man, right? Yeah, exactly. But you would never need to bring a civil lawsuit because your birth certificate's worth billions. So why would you need any money there? Yeah, no, that efforts to try and shoehorn a lot of what George Santos did into either state or federal criminal offenses are not going to work. Okay. And I want to make sure that I'm not making the same mistake and that we're not perpetuating the same false equivalence that you see coming out of, like, assholes on the right. Jonathan Turley wrote a piece over the weekend, and I know. I should have, for my personal sanity and my blood pressure, like my Google alerts should say not Jonathan Turley, not Alan Dershowitz, right? But
yeah, but it is a real thing that's happening on the right, where they say, much like the people who say both the parties are the same, they say, oh, well, the lies that Joe Biden told on the campaign trail are the same as the lies that George Santos told on the campaign trail. And I think that we can, as the public and as humans with, an understanding of nuance, differentiate the two. We can't do it criminally, but we can certainly do it morally and objectively almost.
Yeah, it is, to be clear, and the underlying Supreme Court case that I'm going to talk about involved a Democratic member of Congress, right? Like this is something where I think we want to clearly draw a line in terms of the kind of conduct that might be censurable by the incoming Congress that might eventually lead, look, I think political expediency is going to triumph over doing the right thing here. But as we will find out, there's nothing to stop the House Ethics Committee from recommending that Santos be expelled from the House. And if that were to happen, unlike the Senate, right, where, New York Democratic governor, you could appoint an interim Democratic senator. If a member is expelled from the House, you have to hold a special election, right? And so there's a little bit of a backstop of Republicans could stand on principle and still not kind of give up, right? And go campaign in the district and go, hey, look, we're really sorry. This guy screwed us as well as you. And you wanted to vote for a Republican. You wanted to vote for change. Here, vote for guy who's not, actively out there defrauding you. Okay. I'm not saying.
And imagine the microscope on that guy, by the way.
That's in fairness. That whoever the candidates are in that special election better be Jimmy Carter, right? Like that.
Right. Yeah.
He made me give up my peanut farm.
Yeah. Now let me ask you a legal question, because this is sort of where I was getting a little bit stuck, and not because I believe this to be true, but I always devil's advocate myself. It is illegal to defraud donors to, for instance, the Save America PAC, or Sidney Powell to defraud donors to her PAC by saying that the money is going to be, or Steve Bannon, perfect example, the money is going to go to build the wall when he actually bought a car and paid yacht tax or whatever. That is
Terpsichore Maris.
a crime. Yeah. And what I'd like to know is what makes that a crime? Because obviously there's a thing of value changing hands. You're defrauding somebody. But why is a vote not a thing of value?
Okay, I absolutely love everything that you've just asked. So let me try, as usual, with an Allison question to kind of unpack from the most precise to sort of the most philosophical. The first thing is this is an area where there are two overlapping authorities that come into play here. There are state election laws, because the states, by and large, are in charge of running their own elections, even when that election is for a federal office. And in particular, New York's election law has at least two statutes that seem really clearly to be implicated here. The first is 14-114, and that is a prohibition on certain kinds of campaign contributions, receipt limitations. There's maximums. There's a really, really complicated formula for how much somebody can donate. And then there are requirements for how you report and record those donations, right? So lying about, if an outside force gives $700,000, let's say, just to draw a number out of a hat, and you say, oh no, that's my money, I'm just giving myself $700,000, you would run afoul of both of those sub provisions of 14-114, because you're exceeding the cap. There's no cap on self-financing, but there is pretending that you're self-financing when it's really someone else financing, right? And that second part is 14-120, campaign contributions to be under the true name of the contributor. And so,
right, sure.
Yeah. So that's a law that New York has that we don't have in the federal system, right? We don't have that level of requirement. But we do have a number of specific campaign disclosure requirements that are also in the federal code, right? 52 USC 10306 et sec. And so you have those two kind of differing sovereigns, and if reporting is to be believed, both federal and state investigations have been opened into kind of tracking the money and tracking the disclosures, which is really...
we have Eastern District of New York, and we have Nassau DA, who is a Republican, by the way.
Yeah.
Nassau County DA. But my question is less about campaign finance violations and more about just lying, saying you're Jewish. Right. Because we know that lying to defraud donors is a crime. What makes that a crime? And what makes it not a crime to lie to defraud voters? Because isn't a vote also a thing of value? That's kind of where, like, when I'm sitting here in my head, like, trying to figure out how to defend against somebody criminally charging me with defrauding donors, and a vote is a donation, that's kind of where I'm like, how do you put that together?
Yeah, and I will say, although virtually everything counts as a thing of value for purpose of federal election laws, the one thing that does not is a vote. And here's the way to think about this conceptually. And this is sort of, I told you I was going to start from the most practical and then kind of zoom out to the most philosophical.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Because I do want to talk more about that $700,000 donation and stuff. But I'm very curious about just the, more philosophical lying part.
Here's the way to think about it. I can be a candidate and I can say, I am running on a tax cut, and I'm going to put up on my website a tax cut calculator, and you go in and type in your income, and it will spit out a number, and that's how much money you will make if you elect me to Congress. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? And candidates, in fact, have run on those sorts of platforms all the time, from, the sort of George W. Bush, let's give everybody $300 in 2002, to kind of progressive candidates that have run on, progressive tax reform, that sort of thing. The difference between, if you vote for me, on average, each of you will save $1,400, and hey, I'd like to pay you $1,400 for you to vote for me, is very, 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 very narrow, right? Like it's almost impossible to divide that line up, but yet, right, the statutes that criminalize paying people to vote are explicit, right? There must be a quid pro quo. I must hand you a sack with a literal dollar sign on it. It must be in, non-sequentially numbered 20s. And then, you must go in and vote a particular way in order to, it
right. Like
really
the people
is.
handing out gas vouchers while campaigning for Trump.
Yep. Or as a political,
even then, right?
As a political consultant friend of mine, when I asked this person while intoxicated to confess the worst election-related crime that they had ever committed, it was on Native American reservations circulating voting cards with airline bottles of alcohol attached. And I was like, oh gosh, like I was not prepared for this conversation. But look, so there are the hallmark here is that there are very few principles to be derived in election law, right? From which we say, and it generally in the law, you would say, oh, like, here's the guiding principle. There should be some proportionality between the punishment that we impose and the crime committed, right? That's kind of what the Eighth Amendment means, right? In election law, there isn't much in the way of sort of an overarching principle. And the reason for that is, quite frankly, the long history of belief in the First Amendment and the belief in the First Amendment in applying to core political speech, in elections being core political speech, and the idea that, again, maybe not one that I think is, ought to be accepted uncritically in an age of social media, but the idea in the sort of the John Stuart Mill marketplace of ideas, right? The surest way to be sure of the truth is by its collision with error, right? I'm not sure that that's true in 2022, and in fact, the Santos election, I mean, he won by 8 points in a blue district. I think helps to illustrate that, in fact, campaigns are terrible devices to try and get at the truth.
So you can lie your butt off to get a vote, but not a dollar.
That's right.
And so how do you distinguish that then from, let's say, fundraising for his campaign? You can't distinguish the dollars that were given for saying that he's Jewish, but you can distinguish the dollars that were given for, saying you're going to use the money to build a wall and then you don't use it for that? I'm a little confused about that. Can you help me out with that?
Sure. So keep in mind that the Steve Bannon problem is distinct from a campaign violation, right? The issue with Steve Bannon and what he's being prosecuted for is running a fraudulent charity and diverting the funds.
Well, then let's talk about Trump's big lie.
Yep.
Because that's more philosophical and can be considered a campaign thing, right? Like, the election was stolen, I need your money to help, et cetera, et cetera. And I know there was a lot of investigation in the January 6th committee about that. And that might be public opinion investigation and not criminal. Tell me a little bit about, is it illegal to defraud donors using the big lie if that's your campaign pitch?
Yeah, and I don't think that it is, right? Here's where I would sort of draw the line. And I did a huge investigation into this in Thanksgiving of 2016 when grifter and con woman Jill Stein raised twice as much money as she had during the entirety of her presidential run by claiming that she was going to get recounts in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and the recounts were going to make Hillary Clinton president. And it was all very, very obviously a scam. And I was very comfortable then and now that nobody was going to sue me from Jill Stein headquarters for calling her a fraud and a con artist and a scam, because when you look into it, what they promised to do legally was sort of two things. Number one, in many cases were nonsense. And then number two, that they had written disclaimers onto their own website that said, oh, if for whatever reason we're unable to have standing in these cases, which that's the whole thing, right? Like, you can't sue for a recount on behalf of somebody else, by and large. I mean, again, state laws differ, and they could in Wisconsin, and they did. And in fact, they lost. They cost Hillary Clinton, I think it was like 5 votes in Wisconsin after the end of the recount. But they knew they weren't getting that in Michigan, because Michigan law says that you have to be the person who's aggrieved. And Jill Stein was in 7th place beforehand and 7th place afterwards, and that's not an injury that the court can repair. And they knew that, and their little disclaimer said, oh, if for whatever reason we don't have standing, we're going to use it in our long-standing Green Party efforts to fight, for campaign finance reform, which is basically a way of saying we're going to use this as our general fundraiser, right? And so I thought then, I think now, that if you gave money, again, don't take legal advice from a podcast, but I thought then, and I think now, that if you gave money under false pretenses to the Jill Stein reelection, that you would have a decent cause of action against their campaign committee for fraud. Go ahead.
Okay, now what if Steve Bannon were running for something when he defrauded all those wall people?
Yeah, I think it would make it a harder case, right? Because think about this. Sort of goes back to
it. Kind of says that doesn't that kind of do the whole thing though, where if you can shield yourself from criminal liability if
by
you're
running for
political office.
Yeah, it does. It's one of the things that's absolutely broken about our system. But yeah, I mean, this goes back to the incorrect, much maligned and deservedly so, but there being sort of a kernel of academic respectability. God, I don't even want to use that phrase about the Alan Dershowitz position, right, during the first Trump impeachment, right? It is not that there is some merit to the idea that it remains a professional judgment for a candidate for office to say, oh yeah, well, the best way for me to do X is for me to be elected and not my opponent. And so therefore, if I've promised you a laundry list of stuff and I've used it to my own personal electoral advantage, it is very, very difficult to separate that out. Now, again, obviously, that was insane when applied in the context of obstructing a law that was that used mandatory language, shall send funds to Ukraine. But nevertheless, like that underlying idea of there's this weird notion in politics of, you're doing your job protecting yourself when, because if you sincerely believe that's the best way to deliver on that promise to voters. So take Steve Bannon, right? If he says, I'm going to use this to build the wall, and instead he uses it for his campaign stuff to get himself elected, I think that would be very difficult to prove a fraud case, because you'd be like, I'm going to get elected and then I'm going to build the wall when I'm elected.
Yeah. And I mean, it gets super complicated. And I can see that's kind of where prosecutorial discretion comes in when you're trying to decide whether or not to prosecute a case.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, in the Santos case, we do have a very clear prosecutable crime, if true, with the movement of $700,000 from his business to his paycheck to his. It seems like what he did, and talk about how this doesn't circumvent the law. It seems like he has an LLC, paid himself a salary of $700,000 out of it, and then donated from himself, his personal, his $700,000 to his campaign in what seems to be an effort to circumvent the law that says corporate money can't be used for that. Now, how do you legally come in and say, no, it reminds me sort of like people who try to get married so they don't have to testify against each other, or they're hiding assets by sending shit to Trump Organization 2.0. Or bankruptcy, trying to avoid bankruptcy, or filing bankruptcy to have to try to avoid paying $1.5 billion to Sandy Hook victims. It seems like that is also illegal and could actually double up the crimes instead of trying to skirt them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And what all of those hypothetical and not so hypotheticals that you just put forward have in common is an underlying notion. And I'm going to use these. I'm going to say this is small m, small l. Right. I do not mean this as the federal offense of money laundering, but rather the colloquial sense of money laundering, right? That is, how do I engage in a series of transactions that are designed to hide the fact that this is going from A to B? So I route it through C, D, E, and F, and I make it hard for you to find.
Like Sam Patton buying an inauguration ticket for $25,000.
Exactly right. And I want to say a bunch of things here, okay? The first is that following the money is a thing that prosecutors and federal agents are very, 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 very good at doing. But examples of that abound, right? But on the flip side, we did an entire episode on opening arguments. It was episode 614 on how Donald Trump broke the Federal Elections Commission, and Joe Biden has not yet fixed it. Now, again, a lot of stuff on his plate, that sort of thing. But this is the kind of thing where a couple of appointments, really could have made a difference. And I'm not going to rehash that episode. The hundreds of millions of dollars, if the minority reports are to be believed, coming out of the FEC, that the FEC has just sort of given a pass to the Trump campaign, is I think one of the truly underreported stories of political abuse of the Trump administration. And so, and so I want to balance out that notion of you can follow the money, you can, and prosecutors and federal agents are very, very good at following the money. They're experts that do nothing but that. From the notion that that's been put into practice, particularly that's been put into practice against Donald Trump, which it has not. He's gotten away with a ton of stuff. So, so that's we sit in a regime of kind of uneven enforcement, and I would not want to begin to predict. Other than I can say it sure looks like Democrats and Republicans alike are happy to throw George Santos under the bus. So, if I were gambling, it doesn't look good for him right now.
So if I say in court, Andrew, if I'm Santos and I say, no, that was a personal donation from me personally because I work for this company and they paid me, what do you then present evidence that the company does nothing and that I do nothing for the money. And then, like, how do you sort of prove that I use that to circumvent the system?
So two things. Number one, if you so testify in court or in pleadings, right, you've now opened yourself up to 2 more criminal charges, right? An 18 USC 1001, right? And perjury, right? And again, even though both of those are rarely charged, there's a reason we say perjury is rarely charged. These are because financial crimes are precisely the situation in which perjury does get charged, because it's really, really easy. Did you, steer this payment of $700,000? Absolutely not. Oh, well, is this your signature on the check? Yes, it is. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to add that first part, because I know the distinction. In fact, I think you made it in the tweet, right? The difference between kind of lying into the ether versus lying to a congressional investigatory committee or in court or before Congress. Those
or
are
a grand
all,
jury.
yeah,
right,
or a grand jury, all of that, right? So number one, you've added some new crimes onto the list. And number two, that kind of inquiry is the kind of inquiry that courts do every single day, right? When we need to decide if a corporation is a sham corporation, right? You look at, right? Okay, Essential Consultants, LLC. How was it formed? Who formed it? Who are the members? Where are its bank accounts? Does it have separate stationery? Does it provide other services, right?
Did anyone else deposit money in this? Are there any other clients? Or where did it come from? Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a whole... It's not just as simple as, well, it's obvious. There's a whole body of evidence that needs to be put forth to prove that it's not a legitimate corporation. You didn't legitimately earn $700,000, and you did it just to get around this law.
Right. But I will point out that it is, the dumbest segment of our would-be criminals, George Santos, Alex Jones, that think they've found a new thing when they're like, oh, I'll start an LLC and I'll run the payments through that. And who will own the LLC? Me and an LLC owned by my parents. No one will ever figure this out. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, like, I'm not the first person to think of this. Like, no shit, So.
Yeah, and then you get to the actual super crafty people who run an LLC that seems legit, and they do legit business, and it's a cover and it's a front for this kind of a thing, right? Yep. So then it becomes a little more difficult to bear out and that's kind of where we get into a little bit less stupid Joel Greenberg, no-show jobs and pay contracts for nothing, because then they try to at least make it seem like they're doing something for it, but it still comes out in the wash as pretty obvious.
Yeah, and so again, I don't want to. I love that you mentioned the Greenberg case, right? I mean, he got 11 years. I do not want to say that this is an area that is applied evenly, but I because it's not, right, and sort of the more crafty, the more corrupt, the better you hide it, the more politically connected, the more, if you're Donald Trump, the more historically you've gotten away with it, and that sucks. And that's not to suggest there's not a lot of work that we couldn't do to improve campaign finance and electoral accountability laws in general. But it would be incorrect to say, that people always get away, because that's not true.
Yeah, it's also a resources problem. I talked to Andy McCabe at length about this when I had a first interview with him at the Mueller, She Wrote podcast. And he's like, look, after 9/11, we had pretty much $0 for white-collar crime investigation. It all went to counterterrorism and counterintelligence and everything like that. And as it at the time as it should have. But we're so behind in the funding and in the infrastructure. You and I have been talking about doubling the federal bench forever. At the back end there.
Yep.
One final question for you, because somebody put out a campaign expenditures list from Santos. And, kind of like how I noticed, and we've sort of picked up on the fact that in the Trump NFT trading cards, there was a limit of 100 per customer at $99. So every transaction came in under $10,000, which puts it under the Secure Banking Act, red flag, FinCEN, hey, there might be a problem here. But this laundry list of campaign expenditures by George Santos, or everything is $199.99. Like hotel stays, rental cars, things that cost way more than $199 are all capped at $199.99. Is there something in the law that says we don't generally flag things over $200, or is this just some weird coincidence?
So there is nothing. I saw that there is nothing that I can find in either the federal or the New York State election laws that exempts contributions under $200. But there are sort of numerous, right? Like when you are, reporting expenditures pursuant to 52 USC 30116. A7C, for example, right? Like you have to list, but you in many cases, right, you are supposed to list every coordinated expense with a PAC or with an outside party, and I guess the question is, did they receive advice? Did they receive advice, which I think it's clear that they did, that says like, oh yeah, but look, like nobody ever looks at those lines if it's under $200. And then the second question would be, was that good advice? And that it may not be, right? Like, the people advising the Santos campaign on how to crime, if that in fact happened, I'm not suggesting that it did, but if it did, these were not, they were not sending our best and brightest over there. So,
yeah. And we had that guy Kawaja who was taking tons of money and donating it like 99 cents at a time or something like that. Thousands and thousands of transactions.
Dinesh D'Souza managed to go to prison on a statute that it's almost impossible to go to prison over, right? Like, I mean,
he's special.
Yeah. Ooh boy. In addition to the crime stuff, right, I also wanted to clarify the question regarding whether Santos will be seated in the Congress. So, short answer, yes. And then whether he can be unseated. And the answer to that is yes, too. And it comes from the exact same Supreme Court case. So there's sort of a lot of misinformation going around on both sides on this, the Occupy Democrats level stuff, but also, Republicans. That case comes from a 1968 Supreme Court decision that's called, 1969 Supreme Court decision called Powell versus McCormick, 395 U.S. 486. And it involved the incumbent and very powerful Democratic Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, who was coincidentally from New York. And in the prior session, right? So in 1966, there was an investigation into his behavior. And I mean, I'm sure he's long dead, but I'm going to read directly from the Supreme Court opinion. It says, during the 89th Congress, that was 1966, a special subcommittee on contracts of the Committee on House Administration conducted an investigation into the expenditures of the Committee on Education and Labor, of which petitioner Adam Clayton Powell was chairman, right? So he was chair of the Committee on Education and Labor. That subcommittee issued a report concluding that Powell and certain staff employees had deceived House authorities as to travel expenses. The report also indicated that there was strong evidence that certain illegal salary payments had been made to Powell's wife at his direction. Okay, so that's what that committee found in 1966. Powell was reelected anyway. So, again, good job, New York. And then here's what happened. When the Congress met to organize in January 1967, Powell was asked to step aside while the oath was administered to the other members-elect. Following the administration of the oath to the other members-elect, the House discussed the procedure to be followed in determining whether Powell was eligible to take his seat. After some debate, by a vote of 363 to 65, so bipartisan, the House adopted House Resolution Number 1. Boy, that's real bad when that's which provided that the Speaker appoint a select committee to determine Powell's eligibility. Although the resolution prohibited Powell from taking a seat until the House acted on the select committee's report, it did provide that he should receive all the pay and allowances due a member during the period, because, of course it did. So So that's what happened, right? Investigation in 1966. Congressman is reelected. He's shows up on January 3rd, is like, I'm ready to hold my hand up. And they're like, not so fast, Adam. They pass a resolution. That resolution says we're going to investigate. We're not going to let you take your seat until we're done the investigation. And then Powell sued on that basis and said, you lack the power to prevent me from taking my seat. Right. And the way in which Congress thought they were getting around that was that last part, right? That I made a joke about it, but look, we're giving you all the pay and the benefits of having taken your seat, but we want to figure this out. Like, we want to figure out whether you should be seated or not. And Powell cooperated with the first request by the committee to testify. He did. The committee had, further hearings. They determined that he had asserted an unwarranted privilege and immunity from the New York courts, that he wrongfully diverted House funds for the use of others and himself, and that he had made false reports on expenditures of foreign currency. They recommend that he be seated, but that he be censured, fined $40,000, which, that was like $1 billion back in 1968, and deprived of his seniority, so stripped of his committee and all of his other responsibilities. And
none of that's going to happen here.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So Powell went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said all of those recommendations and all of those requirements and everything else was null and void because it was conditioned on not being able to seat Powell. And the House has absolute authority over its members. It can establish whatever rules it wants. It can kick him out if they want to, but they can't.
2/3 vote, right?
Right, but they can't prevent you from taking your seat. That's a constitutional requirement once you've been duly elected. And so that's what the Powell versus McCormick case stands for. And it kind of puts to bed sort of, I think, the stories on both the far left and the far right. Right. So Powell is going to be seated. There's no chance of that.
Or Santos. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Powell was also seated.
Just like Powell. Yeah.
But then once he is seated, there have already been the other Republican congressmen from the Long Island area have already talked about making an ethics referral out. That the vote in the House is incredibly narrow, right? So I think it is highly likely that the House will refer to will do kind of exactly what the House subcommittee did in 1967. That is, they will arrange a select subcommittee of the ethics committee and refer Santos's case over there, and they will make recommendations. And what are those recommendations going to come to? Well, this is part of why I read you that case. Even in an open and shut case where they discovered that this was a sitting member of Congress using congressional funds as kickbacks to himself and his wife and his friends, they were like, well, yeah, we're not going to kick you out of our club for that, right?
Oh, no, especially if we only have a 5-vote advantage in the House. I don't see it happening.
But they could censure, right?
Whoop-de shit.
Yeah, I know.
No offense. But like
none
how
taken.
They attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Censure is like so 1970s.
And then I'm sorry, you finish.
Yeah, no. I was wondering if there's a recall mechanism in New York. I don't think there is. Is there?
No,
because like Arizona says you can recall any elected official. Yeah, through a recall vote. So and I think the states, because they can run their own elections, would win that SCOTUS battle. Well, I don't know if now, but regardless, I don't think there's a recall provision in New York for every elected official.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
The other thing too is if he gets indicted criminally, that doesn't stop him from being seated or serving in Congress either.
We cannot say that enough. That's right. You can. You can run for president. You can serve in Congress while under indictment or in jail, right? And
unless you insurrected, and then you might be able to bring Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in, which would still be very difficult, but it's there.
Yep. And thankfully, you reminded me of the point that I did want to make, which was apparently, right, like a lot of scrutiny has now come down on Santos's Democratic opponent, and I think rightfully so. And the opponent says, look, there was literally too much to run to ground. Yes, we had some campaign intel. There was a DCCC report, 87 pages on this guy that suggested all kinds of stuff. We pointed out he was at the 1-6 insurrection, that he spoke out in favor of those insurrectionists, that he's a deranged Trumper maniac. Santos ran in 2020 in the same district and got killed. There is kind of a hard political lesson here that, everybody listening to this show to say, oh yeah, it is way worse to have participated in the 1-6 insurrection and to speak glowingly of those folks and to speak glowingly and endorse the racist Trump legacy. In political terms, it still seems that the smartest strategic course is to try and disqualify your opponent in kind of classic terms. And I look there, to the Warnock Herschel Walker race, right? That was mostly not fought over Herschel Walker being a Trump puppet who was going to go in and become
who was also a liar. No, that was more that. Yeah,
it was focused on his absolute incompetence and his campaign lies and that sort of thing. And and that's sort of the lesson here is that the congressional campaign focusing on what should be disqualifying Trump issues, seems like the lesson for the next time around is, if you're doing the PEMDAS, right, you're doing your order of operations, disqualify your opponent first and then hit him on political extremism second. I wish I didn't have to say that. Like, to me, those ought to be equivalent. To me, if you speak glowingly of,
that should be disqualifying in and of itself.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases in the midterms, it was. A lot of people didn't want to, a lot of people voted against election denialism and Trumpism.
Yep. But this is a case where it was raised, where it was on the ballot.
But also, I tend to not blame the Democratic opponent for the lies of the Republican.
Yeah.
You have to spend your money where you need it. So
you do, but this is part of a story. If you are thinking about this strategically, and we have folks who listen to our shows who run for office, right?
No,
it's
the
a hard
problem
lesson.
is if you don't get it done first and they get elected, you can't unelect them. So that's the lesson learned. And again, shoe on the other foot. That's the way we would want it. Although we don't have giant, massive liars. Not to the extent.
Well, and when we do, we turn on them.
Yeah, we absolutely do.
So.
And we remove them because they're unfit. Yeah. And we have another election. That's how we run things. All right. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, talk a little bit about January 6th and all of the trove of evidence that's coming out, because I have some questions for you about some things that Chuck Rosenberg has said. So we'll do that right after this quick break. Stay with us.
I'm Greg Olear. 4 years ago, I stopped writing novels to report on the crimes of Donald Trump and his associates. In 2018, I wrote a best-selling book about it, Dirty Rubles. In 2019, I launched Prevail, a bi-weekly column about Trump and Putin, spies and mobsters, and so many traitors. Trump may be gone, but the damage he wrought will take years to fully understand. Join me and a revolving crew of contributors and guests as we try to make sense of it all. This is Prevail.
Everybody, welcome back to episode 102 of Cleanup on Aisle 45. I'm Allison Gill. Andrew Torrez is with me. Andrew, so like 200,000 pages of stuff has come out between Christmas and New Year's from the January 6th committee, and everybody is trudging through it because it wasn't really released in any sort of coordinated way. But there are some things missing. There's some redactions. It seems like perhaps Jack Smith or the Department of Justice was like, please don't release these certain things. And I want to ask you about that. and the jeopardy that releasing evidence from a congressional investigation to the public, it's how that can jeopardize criminal probes, because I know Chuck Rosenberg's been on this on MSNBC for quite a while, talking about, like, please don't release the stuff to the public. Please just give it to the Department of Justice. Please, please, pretty please. But they've released it, but there are still some redactions. And I looked at the context, and these don't seem to be redactions for, privacy concerns, or, they seem to be redactions because there might be evidence of crimes behind the redaction bars. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Can you explain again, in the clearest terms, how releasing evidence can jeopardize ongoing criminal investigations? We haven't heard anything from the DOJ about whether they're pleased or displeased or otherwise with the release of all this information, but I'm wondering your thoughts.
So, hugely wide open question. As you mentioned, whenever you were talking about evidence that has been gathered, you perform kind of a first level review of was this was this grand jury testimony, for example, that was provided to Congress under an exception and therefore retains its confidentiality and should not be disclosed. And does this relate to an open investigation of that particular identifiable individual, that sort of thing. But the larger question, in my view, has always been how this interacts with an investigatory, a potential prosecution, and your Brady versus Maryland obligations to disclose exculpatory information to the other side, right? And here's what I mean by that. Although many of these are not depositions in the classical sense, right? They are voluntary interviews that have been conducted pursuant to an agreement, although some were folks who appeared under subpoena, right? That basically have been conducted as if they were depositions, right? And the primary purpose of a deposition is to lock in a witness's testimony, right? You want to find out what they know, and they've done a fantastic job. As I've been reading through all of these statements, I've been through probably about 100. This was, my Christmas present as well, so I got a whole bunch of new documents to read. You see, if you pay attention to the date stamp, not the date in which they were released to the public, but the date stamp of the date in which the witness interview was conducted, you see the committee building upon its institutional knowledge, right? And its interviews in August and September of 2022 are done with much more knowledge of the scheme, right? And the questions are more pointed than the 2021 interviews, which are just kind of like, so what's going on here? And who else did you talk about? Have you ever heard of this guy? And, and there's a lot of that sort of kind of digging around. But so there is an exploratory purpose. The interviews were really well positioned for that, but there's also you lock somebody into their testimony. And one of the things that I've talked about on opening arguments is, now that I've had a chance to see the full testimony of from guys like Pat Cipollone and Mark Short, they're going to be terrible witnesses. They are not going to be called as witnesses in a trial against Donald Trump. On the other hand, I understand you would have a tingling feeling from the belt down, but I think they're going to call Bill Barr, right? He's not locked into giving any potentially exculpatory testimony. So I think there's that category, right? In general, if you're thinking about making a prosecutorial decision, you would like as little as possible of the witnesses and what they've said to be made public and to be available to people that you have not yet brought formal charges against. Because I promise you, however incompetent folks like Evan the Cork and Christina Bobb are, like Charles Burnham, like is a competent white-collar criminal defense lawyer, right? Like, there are lawyers in Trump's orbit that know how to defend these kinds of cases, and they are hard. They're working at least as hard as I am in digesting this information and kind of probing for weak spots. And there are some that are out there. So I'm a firm believer. I want to see everything, right? I'm a journalist. And so, I think that all of this is about the judgment of history in addition to the charging a crime, but I understand.
I think that releasing a lot of this information, which is a lot of it was already publicly known. There hasn't been too much that's blown me away. Of course, people are still sifting through it. A lot of this came out during the hearings. I think something that's very important that I didn't want to see happen, that didn't happen, is the immunization of witnesses by the 1-6 committee that could thereby interfere with criminal prosecutions, because I keep thinking back to Ollie North and that whole situation and Iran-Contra. Another interesting thing, Andrew, that I want to ask you about, we've got 2 letters unearthed now from December 30th from the January 6th committee, one going to the Department of Homeland Security and one going to a guy named Dick Sauber, who is a special counsel to President Biden. He was brought in last May to help defend Biden against a possible Republican House of Representatives next year, like impeachments and investigations and things like that. And these letters say, hey, we thank you for the testimony of redacted. We want to keep these people's names private. We are sending you the file of their information. Please file with the archives. Take any additional steps you need to make sure that their names don't get out to the public. So they aren't releasing everything, it seems.
Yeah, I think that reading is exactly correct.
Yeah. And so the thing that I'm curious about, though, is who these people were, because they're in the Biden administration. Now, with DHS, I'm assuming it could be folks like in the Secret Service who are left over from the Trump administration. That I can see because they're current government employees. But Richard Sauber, who in his office testified to the January 6th committee? What lawyers does he have working for him, working for Biden, that have knowledge of stuff that happened in the events leading up to January 6th? That sort of blows my mind. And again, I think it's evidence that they aren't releasing all the evidence, which I think is a good thing.
I agree with that entirely. I guess I would sort of say this, that like, in my mind, what I have learned, in addition to evaluating kind of the character of witnesses, right, of all of the folks that, where we saw a selective presentation, right? And again, Pat Cipollone was the biggest kind of red flag for me, because, if you take apart some of the things that he has said, that I was encouraged by his cooperation with the 1-6 committee. When you look at the entirety, his 210-page transcript, there's so many weasel words. There's so much that he could walk back that just makes me really, really nervous. So I've learned that. Set that aside. The other big thing that I've learned from the information from the documents that have been referenced, and we just got today more of the underlying emails that were circulated that are referenced in the committee's 845-page report. And you're right that we're not learning new details in broad strokes, right?
Right. We're learning new details. We're not learning new concepts.
Yes,
I think
that perfect. I could that
like for example, the Ronna McDaniel link, because. And you were going right there. I just stole your punchline, didn't I? Because
no,
that to me was, we knew, Ronna, that Trump called and handed the phone off to Eastman and had a discussion with Ronna McDaniel, Romney, right?
Yep.
What we didn't know is that she got all those electors back together, gave a list to Donald Trump himself, called Donald Trump on several occasions to give him updates on gathering the fraudulent electors. And that, to me, is the direct link we've been looking for with regard to him being in charge of the fraudulent elector scheme and directing it, right? And so those kinds of bits of evidence, whereas before it was a broad concept, now there's evidence of criminal culpability there, or mens rea, or whatever the fuck Latin term you want to smack on it for me, Andrew. That's my local lawyer colloquialisms for the day. To me, that was my big standout moment. That is the direct link, because, I remember when you and I were talking about the Eastman emails, and the judge said, "Hey, this Eastman and Trump were together in this scheme," and we were like, "Yeah, but where's that direct link?" But then we also have to remember, criminally, there doesn't have to be a direct link to be part of the conspiracy, right?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I was going to talk about something that was adjacent to that, but I think, again, directly supporting your point, and that is the existence of new Ken Cheesebro emails, right? That analyze the 7 states, talk about getting alternate slates of electors, and because these people never thought that anybody would pierce through, attorney-client communications, say things like, well, it's going to be an uphill battle in Pennsylvania and it's a long shot in Arizona and Wisconsin, or, whatever. I'm making up the states, but shows their state of mind as they go through, not just evaluating at the top line. Oh, what do you mean by, it's going to be an uphill climb? Oh, it's going to be an uphill climb because these folks must meet in the Capitol. These states have a requirement that the Secretary of State sign off on it. And so then when they present those Denny's parking lot electors certificates, and they know they didn't meet in the Capitol, they know it doesn't bear the seal of the Secretary of State. They know it wasn't approved.
And Pennsylvania putting on their thing, that caveat that this is only in the case of something happening in the courts. And they're like, damn it, that's not what we wanted you to say.
Yeah, no, that's right. And again, those are all... I love the way you put it, right? These are not new theories of the case, but they are new supporting details that flesh out, that give us comfort that, that the 1-6 committee did a thorough job in kind of teeing that up. But for example, an area that we still have no idea about. This is not one. This is has never come up in the 1-6 committee, and it is something that I hope Jack Smith is investigating, and that is the 1-3 to 1-5 war room at the Willard and the coordination from Donald Trump to the Proud Boys on the ground, which you and I suspect is in the possession of Roger Stone. Now we know,
or Bannon,
we know Roger Stone's not going to flip. Right? That we've been there. He's already done time, right? Like he'll do time again. Okay. That only helps his brand. But are there folks connected who can be squeezed? Is there information that we can get out that can show that connection? We don't know. Right. But that's why you have a special counsel who is known for going after election crimes and political crimes, and it's yet to be seen. So I guess I would put it, let's kind of bring that question sort of back full circle. It certainly appears that most of the 1-6 committee stuff is being produced, and I am very happy with that as a journalist and as somebody who believes that their mission was and was successfully conducted largely in the public. But there are areas that the 1-6 committee didn't investigate, whether for time or because, as you described, they didn't want to go down the approach of immunizing folks, right? Who knows? But that they didn't go there. And those are areas that are teed up, that are identified in their report and in the criminal referral section to the Department of Justice of, hey, look, there might be obstruction crimes here.
You have the resources to go after this.
Take a look. So
and also one of the big concerns about releasing all the evidence is that it gives the defense a chance to prep a defense. Right now, two thoughts on that from me, Andrew. First of all, all of the bad guys and recalcitrant witnesses' lawyers were paid for by the Save America PAC. They were already sharing all the information about that the committee had and knew. They were already sharing all that information. And there's nothing wrong with a joint defense agreement. It gets down to whether or not you're, paying bills to suborn perjury. Suborn perjury. That's
nice.
That's a new one. And second of all, giving them time to prep a defense. What defense? There's really no good defense here. So I'm obviously you don't want to give anybody an upper hand anywhere, but in some of these like seriously open and shut cases, it's like, I think of Donald Trump at his 11th Circuit special master. They had all the time in the world to prep these defenses and they couldn't come up with shit. So a little not too worried about that either.
Yeah, and let me add, as we talk about the far end of the quote joint defense agreement, that we talked about this on yesterday's OA, that there is a world of difference between a legitimate joint defense agreement and what Stephan Passantino appears to have done to poor Cassidy Hutchinson, right? Like that crosses every conceivable line, and whether that will result in a criminal prosecution of Passantino, Liz Dye and I disagree on that one. I took the pro side because I'm an optimist, and she took the con side because she's smarter than me. But yeah, like so. I guess I would say this to the prosecutors who are listening, to the sort of pro let's not tip our hand side, that there's a lot that is still out there that is non-public, and I think it's a good division right now. And
and we have to remember too, one of the number one schemes that the Department of Justice has been investigating for months and months now is the fraudulent elector scheme, going all the way back, and the Department of Justice scheme, and as it relates to the fraudulent elector scheme, going back to the beginning of the year. And I have to imagine, and we know that the committee had started handing over, the DOJ prioritized them handing over documents and testimony and transcripts that involved the fraudulent elector scheme, like way before the election even happened. So, there may have been some communications there. I'm not sure, but this is something that's been going on it's not like the Department of Justice just said, oh, look, whoa, there was a fraudulent elector scheme. They've been on this for quite a while. They already have probably all, if not more, of the evidence than the January 6th committee is handing over. They just need those transcripts in a lot of these cases to make sure that there's consistency.
Yeah, and I'm going to end with, since I just started digging into the documents, I tried to key on a couple of sources that I knew had things that I wanted to track down. And one of them are, and they're not numbered in any helpful way.
No.
But I started looking at the Chapman University productions, right? Because that's what kicked off the entire crime fraud ruling from the California court. And so one of the things that we have here is we have all of the lawyers, including outside lawyers like William Olson, but also Ken Cheeseborough and John Eastman, weighing in on, hey, should we bring an action, right, a declaratory judgment action that Mike Pence has the right to open and count and reject and do whatever the hell he wants with the electors. And what we have learned is that was openly debated, and that the team of lawyers advising Donald Trump said was, oh no, we definitely do not want to bring this kind of lawsuit because we will lose, and then we can't pretend like it's a valid theory on January 6th.
They did that with the Gohmert lawsuit as well.
That's exactly right. They were opposed to the Gohmert lawsuit because they were like, no. Yeah.
Don't ask for permission. Ask for forgiveness later.
Exactly right. But what we didn't have was, for example, this is an embedded email from Olson to the group, to which Eastman then replies. So here's what Olson says. There are 7 questions.
Kurt Olson or William Olson?
This is William Olson, but Kurt Olson is also on Kurt Olson is not on this list, but Eastman, Larry Joseph, Mark Martin, Don Brown, Patrick McSweeney.
Doc Brown?
Yeah.
The actor? No, I'm sorry.
Excellent. He says, here are the questions that I would raise before filing a lawsuit like this. 1, what is the likelihood of a favorable decision by the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia? I would say 10% max, right? And that gives a little bit of analysis. 2, what's the likelihood of a favorable decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for D.C.? I would say 10%. Then there's a little bit of, breakdown of the politicals of the judges. 3, love this one. What is the likelihood of a favorable decision by SCOTUS by January 6th? Answer, I would say 0%.
Interesting.
4, what would Pence do without a declaratory judgment? Unknown. 5, what would Pence do with a favorable or unfavorable declaratory judgment? Unknown. 6, what do our House and Senate leaders handling the Electoral College challenges think about this suit? Unknown. 7, what does POTUS think he could be at risk here? Unknown. So that's a really special document that we didn't see before. And Eastman's reply is, I agree with this, except I put the odds at winning in either DDC, right, District Court of the District of Columbia, or the Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia, closer to 0, and the risk of getting a court ruling that Pence has no authority to reject the Biden certified ballots very high, and danger that SCOTUS will decline to take as well. Best we could hope for then is a dismissal as non-justiciable. Let's hold and think this through. That is John Eastman, December 22nd, 6:15 p.m.
Fuck.
2 weeks before circulating his wargaming of, no, of course Pence can do whatever the hell he wants. And so the significance of all of that.
Also showing that that this is illegal.
I love it. That's what I was going to say, right? That's the significance of this document and the many, many others that are like this that are coming
Are there
up.
any other reasons that the court would toss it out or refuse to hear it?
When the person, the argument that the January 6th committee teed up time and time again, I think really effectively. You and I talked about this. They did this amazingly well in the executive summary portion of their report with the 2 columns in Microsoft Word. And the left-hand column is, here's what people next to Donald Trump were saying. And then here's Donald Trump saying the exact opposite 2 days later, right? And the inference is over and over again, either Trump knew he was lying or he was willfully blind and just didn't care. And here, knowing that the team of advisors that worked on this scheme knew that it was full of shit from the very, very beginning, put down in writing, this is not just, because previously we had Eastman going, we had Greg Short testifying that he told Eastman, you're never going to get this through the Supreme Court. And Eastman initially said, well, maybe Thomas would vote for it. Maybe it would be 8-1 against us. But as Jacob continued, by the end of that conversation, I had him convinced that it was 9-0 against, right? That not even Clarence Thomas would vote for these shenanigans.
But here we have Eastman himself.
Here we have Eastman saying,
none.
The risk is 0. I think the likelihood that we get an adverse ruling is very high. The best we could hope for is that they say we're not going to look at this lawsuit. That's really damning stuff. And there's lots more to come. So I love 2023, the year of accountability.
100%. Thank you so much. I know we went a little bit over time. We had a lot to talk about, so I appreciate you hanging in there with us. We will be back this weekend with a super secret Patreon bonus episode. I think those come out Friday. If you are a $2 per regular public show patron, you will get those for free. And Andrew, we need to start talking about a little bit later this month having another Zoom call.
I absolutely love those. They are so much fun.
With our patrons. We've got so many new patrons to invite onto that call. I'm looking forward to that. AMA, Q&A, happy hour, cocktail, mocktail, bonanza. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy New Year. I've been Allison Gill.
I'm Andrew Torrez.
And this is Cleanup on Aisle 45. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill and Andrew Torrez with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.
Season 4 of How We Win is here.
For the past 4 years, we've been making history in critical elections all over the country. And last year, we made history again by expanding our majority in the Senate, beating election-denying Republicans in crucial state house races, and fighting back a non-existent red wave.
But the MAGA Republicans who plotted and pardoned the attempted overthrow of our government now control the House, thanks to gerrymandered maps and repressive anti-voter laws. And the chaotic spectacle we've already seen shows us just how far they will go to seize power, dismantle our government, and take away our freedoms.
So, the official podcast of The Persistence is back with Season 4. There's so much more important work ahead of us to fight for equity, justice, and our very democracy itself. We'll take you behind the lines and inside the rooms where it happens with strategy and inspiration from progressive changemakers all over the country.
And we'll dig deep into the weekly news that matters most and what you can do about it with messaging and communications expert, co-founder of Way to Win, and our new co-host, Jennifer Fernandez Ancona.
So join Steve and I every Wednesday for your weekly dose of inspiration, action, and hope.
I'm Steve Pearson.
And I'm Jennifer Fernandez Ancona.
And this is How We Win.